This is actually the main report on. Oops, what happened here? The main report on waste. So let's see. I am having trouble with the PowerPoint, which should be okay in a minute. Does this work? Let's see. Yes. Am I recording? Yes. Okay. So, hello. Okay. Sorry about that. It's early morning and I'm not up yet mentally. We looked at beyond an age of waste, turning rubbish into a resource in the previous podcast, which is specifically aimed for the youth. As I said in that podcast, putting more burden on the youth whose future we have colonized, we meaning the old people, is kind of unfair, but nonetheless it is their future, so they have to do something because we are not doing enough. This is a broader report on what's happening, so I'm going to keep it brief because the main points have been made already in the first podcast. As we know, waste is hugely diverse and there are different ways of categorizing it. For example, material such as food waste or plastic waste, and product type such as e-waste, so electrical and electronic waste, or end-of-life vehicles which contain multiple materials, the body, the axis, the engine, the electronics of it, and so on, and sources such as municipal solid waste which contains multiple product types and materials. Some products or materials found in the municipal solid waste stream MSW are of particular concern, this owing to rapid increase in their amounts or difficulties in collection, treatment, and other aspects of waste management aimed at meeting standards for protecting health and environment. Just because everybody puts it into a waste can that can be collected doesn't mean that it can be easily sorted and treated and recycled and so on, because none of them are designed necessarily for a circular economy or end-to-end usefulness. Examples of these materials are hazardous chemical waste, electrical and electronic waste, textiles, plastics, food waste, end-of-life vehicles, and waste from mechanics garage, which could include oil as well, right? So non-municipal solid waste include construction and demolition waste, industrial waste, agricultural waste, and healthcare waste. Medical waste is also you know, very important to handle carefully because it can have toxic material and environmentally harmful things as well. In general, waste and triple planetary crisis is looked at as how it affects climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. I won't read all of these, but under climate change, the waste impact includes transporting, processing, disposing of waste generates. Sorry, I didn't read it correctly. Transporting, processing, and disposing of waste generates CO2 and other greenhouse gases and airborne pollutants that contribute to climate change. And you know that landfills produce methane and so on. We already mentioned that. Biodiversity loss. Indiscriminate waste disposal practices can introduce hazardous chemicals into soil, water bodies, and the air, causing long-term, potentially irreversible damage to local flora and fauna, negatively impacting biodiversity, harming entire ecosystems, and entering the human food chains. This is well documented across many sites. Pollution. Between 400,000 and 1 million people die every year as a result of diseases related to mismanaged waste that includes diarrhea, malaria, heart disease, and cancer. A reference is provided there for that you can follow up on. The waste hierarchy and the role of different parts of society in controlling the generation and management of municipal waste. You have upstream and downstream categories produced by governments, producers, retailers, waste management sector itself, and of course consumers. Upstream, you want to prevent, reduce, and reuse, and consumers play a big role in it. Retailers are not expected to prevent, I guess, because they have to buy and sell things. So it comes down to the producers, government regulations, policies, incentives, and so on, and consumers. Reduce and reuse. So waste management sector comes in the downstream part of it, where recycling, recover energy, heat and control emissions, and dispose is all up to them, but consumers are in all of these and governments have to get involved in all of these. Producers can get involved in recycling, but they are not involved in the rest of it, even though extended reproduction cycle, I forgot what it's called, where producers, in a circular economy sense, producers can worry about designs that favor recovery of recovery of energy, heat, and controlling emissions, and disposing as well, just in terms of making them circular economy friendly, right? Or be completely part of a circular economy. You expect that GDP per capita is going to have a relation to waste per kg per person per year. So as GDP per capita increases, the waste does increase quite rapidly, even though there is a lot of scatter here, because it depends on whether you are full of assets, or what your consumption patterns are, and what kind of social values you are living with. Cultural background matters in how people waste things or recycle things, and you can see some are way up here, even though the per capita GDP is not so high. So this is in terms of purchasing power parity pegged to 2017 international US dollars, but without worrying about those details, this has a slight plateauing here and maybe a little dip as well, because rich people begin to be maybe more mindful. Maybe they are living in communities which require better disposal of waste, recycling, and so on. So can we, the main challenge is to prevent these, so that the system itself has to provide ways for people to reduce waste. So some 2.7 billion people do not have their waste collected, so that's something to worry about. Many rural areas and even towns in India do not have a systematic waste collection. People dump it in the corner of the street, and sometimes it gets picked up in a few weeks, sometimes in a month, but if it's raining, you can imagine it can become a total mess. There are lots of details, so this is very region specific. The report has lots of details by region in terms of waste produced, waste collection, waste management systems, and so on and so forth, which I'm skipping, but you can definitely go and look up. The report is quite detailed. Here, estimated direct costs of municipal solid waste management globally in 2020. So total direct costs on average 252.3 billion, which goes into collection. So a lot of it is just collection, about a half, and then you have a bit for landfill disposal, and you have waste energy recovery that's costing you in terms of management, and there is recycling and just dumping. Okay, so obviously in terms of levers for reducing costs, you know that collection cost can be reduced, but how? That's the key question. Do people bring it somewhere? In which case, how do you cost the collection? Do you account for people's expenses, or do you just account for municipal expenses, and so on and so forth? So without going into those details, let's look at comparative analysis of the three scenarios for global municipal solid waste generation. We mentioned these scenarios in the previous podcast for the youth as well. Waste management is usual, so business as usual. Waste under control, and circular economy. So we are going from 2020 to 2050. My computer wants to restart. total municipal waste in millions of tons from 2020 to 2050. If you don't do anything business as usual, this keeps going up in terms of total amount and per capita rate as well, which is not good. If you have waste under control, you reduce the numbers, but obviously you're still increasing out to 2050 both the total waste and per capita, but per capita can plateau at some point in the 2040s and doesn't ramp up as fast as in the case of no controls. With circular economy, you actually want to dip the numbers, so you go up into 2030 and dip a little in 2040, and by 2050 you will come down quite nicely in terms of the total as well as the per capita. And you can see the total municipal solid waste as well as per capita in kg percent per day dip nicely, and all the numbers are low here as you go forward. In 2030 they are all the same but in terms of the total and the per capita, but 2040 2050 is where big differences are seen in the three scenarios. How realistic are they? What are the assumptions involved? Well, you have to go and dig it out of the report. Estimated negative impact on greenhouse gas emissions from waste relative to 2020. There are similar graphs shown for health impacts and environmental impacts and so on that are worth looking up. So you are looking at impact in terms of percentages. So baseline of 2020 where you have 0. Then in obviously waste management as usual will continue to increase and will become 91% more emissions from waste as compared to 2020. Surely not something you want. With waste under control, you dip to minus 69% from 2020 baseline. With circular economy, you go down to minus 154%, and as we saw before, here you can actually have negative cost in the sense you recover and reuse and recycle, extract energy, and upcycle the waste to produce value added products and so on. What are the barriers to change? You can see here that growth and development don't have to come with increased waste production. The city of Kitakyushu in Japan stands out as an example of achieving waste reduction with only 0.42 kilogram of municipal solid waste generated per person per day. Fantastic number. It's almost like irreducible beyond that. But in terms of barriers, there are lots of details I will skip. So waste as a complex problem, that's already the big barrier. Waste management is a complex problem characterized by multi-layered interdependencies, compound social dynamics, and webs of stakeholders. A wicked problem as described in Salvia et al. I have a couple of podcasts on wicked problems. Let me read this and then come back. Combination of these factors lead to unpredictable outcomes with decisions impacted by how challenges are understood and framed. Lack of recognition of the urgency of waste challenge. If the landfill is out there and you're not smelling it and seeing it, you think that's not a big deal. You don't necessarily see the pollution in the air and the water and the soil that easily. Data on pollution and health risks is often lacking. Climate impacts are underestimated and mitigation opportunities are underexploited. So here, wicked problem is basically a terminology that came out of the 1960s by two Berkeley faculty of urban design. I think they were trying to deal with people trying to share a common space, and they learned that some problems have no solutions, so you just have to compromise and find a resolution, which means you will be resolving it again and again because people again start to quibble after a few years of resolving it. So these are generally called wicked problems, where, common examples are of course climate change, where there is no single solution, so you will be resolving it, and healthcare, guns, abortion, education. These are all wicked problems depending on where you are. Some countries don't see them as wicked problems, some do, like guns, right? Lack of inclusion, policies and infrastructure for municipal waste management developed without inclusive, participatory and representative decision making are more likely to fail due to being either ill-informed or inappropriate to the local context. Local context, indigenous knowledge and so on are always really, really important for any problems of global commons or regional or local commons. Gendered aspects of waste are not recognized, so obviously women deal with household waste all the time, and children and women are affected by how it is collected and treated and how it is disposed of. The informal sector is undervalued, so often we saw piles of garbage in the first podcast. A lot of children try to glean recyclable cash value material out of it and end up with all kinds of health issues as well. In general, even adults working in the waste collection and treatment and disposal recycling sector can be not well recognized as as an employment sector, no benefits and so on. Legislation is frequently inadequate and ineffective for waste disposal or waste management as a whole. Lack of an enabling environment, incentivizing people and firms to reduce waste, reuse, recycle and so on, just doesn't have enough of an enabling environment in terms of where they can recycle, where they can leave the waste, and what happens if they don't do it and so on. Weak enforcement, sanctions and penalties, so even when strong regulations may exist, enforcement may not be very strong and sanctions and penalties may not be harsh enough to make people think twice about it. We talked about this a little bit in recycling food waste in Korea and so on. So there is the moral hazard part where if you penalize people, then they may turn around and say, I'll pay the penalty and not bother doing what I'm supposed to do, right? So you have to be careful. There are also technical barriers that are universal and contextual. There are persistent market and financial barriers just in terms of who will run waste management companies. Is this making money or is it heavily subsidized? Is it worth taking the subsidy and running this with all the labor problems and so on and so forth? Converging pathways to preventing and managing waste. All countries can take steps towards ensuring goods and services are provided in such a way as to avoid unnecessary waste. So pathways to prioritizing waste. I won't read the details, as you can see. Without clear local, national and regional as well as global evidence of the scale of the municipal waste challenge, attracting political support and finance will remain difficult. The need for irrefutable evidence calls for improved data. In the age of information and Industry 5.0, as defined by Adele 2022, the tools are now available to improve waste data collection and management, including gender disaggregated data, as well as to harness the power of the data to make waste reduction and waste management a global priority. If it has mitigation potential, then it obviously can evolve a global leadership, but often it's a very local, location specific, cultural, socio-economic problem. So there are the challenges on how to build technologies and transferable solutions or policies. Pathways to waste prevention. Zero waste and circular economy models exist. Actually implementing anything in a circular economy has a long way to go, but optimistic view is that we'll continue to progress towards it and decarbonize the system and so on. High-level comparisons of linear single-use system and proposed reuse system for Indian street vendors as an example. There are many case studies provided. I'm just using one because I'm sitting in India and I'm Indian. Single-use system, distribution, vendor, customer, collection, waste disposal. We looked at it in the first podcast as well for youth. So you have transport and material flow in terms of a reuse system where you have distribution, the vendor gets it, customer buys it, customer returns, and the dishwashing center cleans it and gives it back to the vendor, and there is a collection for what doesn't go here, and then there is waste and disposal. So India has a very large street vendor system in every town, city, rural area, and so on, and it's an informal livelihood and needs to be part of the mainstream also in terms of waste reduction and management, right? So share of parties referring to the specific priority areas and frequently indicated mitigation options in nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. If waste is mentioned, it's great because that means the countries are thinking about waste reduction, reuse, and recycling as their way of reducing their emissions. So waste is mentioned in 77% of them. Waste recycling, waste reduction, waste to energy, cross-cutting themes from waste to other, maybe food, water, energy, and so on, and composting is mentioned in almost a quarter of the reports, over a quarter of the reports, right? So that's encouraging that countries are thinking of these as part of the NDCs as well, part of mitigation, and they will be part of adaptation, because if you can reduce waste and manage them carefully, you reduce pollution, air pollution, water pollution, soil pollution, and so on. So for a livable future, the current pattern of linear resource use needs to be halted with urgency. And conclusions and recommendations. Finally, multinational development banks, donors, and philanthropic organizations need to get involved in making especially developing countries and least developed countries need help. National governments need to get involved, municipalities, producers, and retailers have to be engaged, and waste management sector itself, which in many places can be a little bit of a let's say use the word carefully, a mafia. Waste collection can be a mafia, and many issues involved there on how waste management sector works. In terms of citizens, pursue conscious consumerism, buying only what is needed and avoiding goods that are over-packaged, unnecessarily single-use, or have a short lifespan. So avoiding goods that are over-packaged, unnecessarily single-use, or have a short lifespan. Use refill and deposit return schemes where they exist. Where possible, reuse and recycle at home to reduce waste and its burden on municipalities and the environment, for example by home composting. Segregate unavoidable waste into 3 streams for its economical and sustainable management: food and garden waste, dry and clean recyclables, and residual waste. There are reports saying that citizens do this, but then the waste management sector is not really managing it very well to the end stage. Use consumer power to influence business practices. Support local businesses that offer goods and services in a way that promotes zero waste and a circular economy. Finally, the Global Waste Management Outlook 2024 echoes the 2025 Global Waste Management Outlook's call to action to scale up efforts to prevent waste generation, to extend adequate, safe, and affordable municipal solid waste management to everyone worldwide, and to ensure that all unavoidable waste is managed safely. Well, that's good news and bad news. If 10 years ago the report said the same things and we are still saying the same things, generally means we haven't made much progress. So that's important as well. Okay, so let's leave the waste management here beyond the age of waste, from refuse to resource. Okay, see you in the next topic, which I don't remember what it will be, but see you anyway.